Have you ever wondered if you've lived before or will live again? Are you curious about what happens to your soul after you die? Or maybe you've met someone you're sure you've known before. Or maybe you're just wondering if you have talents, skills, and experiences from a prior life that could help you now. Hi, I'm Brownell Landrum, author of the upcoming We Meet Again trilogy, and I'd like to welcome you to the Life is a Trip podcast. The following story was written by yours truly, aka Brownell Landrum. It's based on a true story that happened to me in 2024 that profoundly changed my life. The reading is performed by the incomparable Eliza Kaye and Zahan Mehta.
This is one of those love stories where the end is the end. But since it's a reincarnation story, is the end ever really the end? With that in mind, meet Robert and Nell.
A warning to the hopeless romantics. This story has a happy ending, but probably not the kind you're yearning for. It's a joyful tale about cheating and lying and heartbreak. It's also a wrenching account of passion, purpose, and promise.
How do you think we did? X asks Y, looking down, so to speak, at Nell and Robert's tearful goodbye.
How did we do, or how did they do?
X gets more specific. Do you think their encounter fulfilled its purpose?
Why, sniffles. I know they both signed up for this, but it's still so painful. Lifetime after lifetime, they never end up together.
X sighs. They almost did that one time. You know as well as I do, it's not up to us, it's up to them. Free will and all that. We just create the opportunities.
Note to the reader. The soul has no gender, though sometimes they choose a persona they relate to the most. In this case, X embodies feminine energy, while Y is more fluid and collective.
X hasn't had a lifetime on Earth for millennia, preferring to be a guide to those courageous souls choosing to incarnate on one of the most challenging and often frustratingly illogical planets in the universe.
Conversely, Y's idealism lures them into repeatedly reincarnating to make a difference, only to return defeated.
Upstairs, X and Y make a good team. X is the practical one, following the rules, and ensuring lessons are learned and growth attained by the people they watch over, even if the cost is the agony of seeing her subjects languish in the process.
Y, on the other hand, is the hopeful dreamer, preferring a gentler touch. The problem,
X tells them over and over again, is that pain can be a gift and that tough love is often the fastest path to progress.
Y blows their celestial nose. I just love them together. Look how her accepting nature gets him to drop his cultivated facade, and how he opens up her fragmented heart to trust again. They both had given up on love.
Not him. That's why they probably aren't going to make it in this lifetime either. He embarked on a year of freedom and adventure and ended up falling for the first woman he met just a few days before Nell got there. X lets out a long, deep breath.
It's so frustrating. I know the traffic angels must have worked so hard to coordinate the encounter of two nomads traveling the world, but
They didn't have much to work with before, when Nell and Robert were stagnant and not making progress.
wallowing.
Wallowing is a good word for it.
True, but then when Robert and Nell finally took a risk, the timing was still off.
Was it? X asks with a playful sparkle in her eyes.
Given how it ended, yes, pouts Y.
Would it make you feel better if we talk with the Z's? X asks, knowing that Y doesn't quite comprehend the way traffic angels work. Truly, they have one of the most multifaceted and thankless jobs in the universe. The logistics it takes to get two people in their 60s together in the same place at the same time while battling the free will of not only the couple but everyone else in their lives is like simultaneously trying to spin plates and conduct an orchestra while riding a unicycle and frying chicken.
Receiving X and Y's telepathic message the instant the thought forms, Z1 and Z2 arrive and brace for the conversation. They're used to being blamed for everything, from elections to erections. The construction kind. Get your head out of the gutter. At least for now. The spicy stuff is coming. Pun intended. And it's not like the Z's don't lament the outcomes they can't control. They get as heartbroken as anyone else upstairs when there's not a happy ending on Earth.
Z1, the quintessential people pleaser, has a quote from Orson Welles in her office to keep her motivated when plans go haywire. If you want a happy ending, that depends on where you stop your story.
The Z's are traffic angels, responsible for bringing people together. While others handle the weather, the lottery, and politics, their work is shepherding carefully coordinated logistics between souls with a lesson to learn, a goal to accomplish, or a contract to fulfill.
The thing humans don't understand is that their souls can have multiple mates over the course of countless lifetimes, and can take the form of parents, children, siblings, lovers, and even sometimes a nemesis. Usually, these unions are planned by both parties before they're born, with the caveat that anything can happen in an earthly lifetime, and it often does.
The team upstairs wouldn't have a job if everything was predestined. They'd just sit back and watch someone else's scripted story, like actors on a stage, instead of flesh and blood complicated creatures who make missteps and mistakes. There would be no point in reincarnating, no learning, no growth.
While the Z's generally work with a multitude of souls, X and Y have been assigned explicitly to Robert and Nell. Over the centuries, they've witnessed these two exquisite, complicated, and passionate spirits who have such a unique bond, yet somehow they've never been able to connect.
Every time X and Y help Nell and Robert give it a try and plan their next lifetime, the more grief-stricken they all are when it doesn't work out. Sometimes they were too young or overly career-driven. In others, they were impatient and committed to someone else.
The team has looked into whether a malevolent force might have been keeping these two souls apart, and found that while they do have some antagonists in the midst, ready to take advantage of their failures, their misses are more personal. Nell is self-reliant and independent. Being a natural giver, she's afraid to lose herself in a relationship, which makes her quick to leave when her stability is threatened.
On his side, Robert is going through a particularly confusing time in his life. In many ways, he's like a beagle let off the leash. Every sight, song, and smell enticing him to venture into treacherous territory. This quest for experience conflicts with his other foundational characteristic. You see, Robert is loyal to a fault. While that sounds great, he tends to stay in unhealthy situations more out of allegiance than affection, leading to atrophy and antipathy. It also means he can have a difficult time discerning a physical connection from a soul union. He needs to learn that for any real relationship to last, the couple must connect on all three levels: mind, body, and spirit.
Summoned by X and Y, the Z's start out on the defensive. Do you have any idea how difficult it is to get an American woman rooted in the mountains in Colorado to go all the way to Tunisia in early January? Z1 says. At the same time, a British man is finally free enough to travel the world?
Z2 adds, "We had to get her pushed out of her lease with no place to go, lure her to Italy under the guise of needing to be there for her writing, close out the applications for a long-term visa so she had to find an interim place to go after her 90-day tourist visa ended, and delay those plans long enough for those 3 months to end at the same time he was there." Why sighs? No, they didn't know.
You wanted us to get them together, Z1 says, trying to understand the confusion. From her perspective, they did their job.
Z2 snaps, "And we did! Did we get a medal? No. We got our vacation interrupted to come here to explain to you two," Z2 says, not masking his frustration.
I know it's not your fault. You pulled off a miracle, X says compassionately. It was so beautiful seeing them connect in the hotel pool. And it was so close, just the day after.
"I know you're going to say the day after Nell arrived," Y says. "But they tried to hold in their emotions. But it was also the day, no, hours after the other woman left. Did you have to cut it so close?" Z2 scowls as effectively as gesturing a talk to the hand. They get the message. The other woman, she has a name.
They know. Francine.
Why wants to scream? Are you really trying to compare the freeze-dried instant romance he had with Francine comparable to what he had with Nell? But holds their tongue.
Why are we here? Z1 asks, sincerely curious. Where Z2 is the contrarian, Z1 really does want to learn. Traffic angels don't often get much information on what happens after they do their work. They're too busy moving on to perform the next miracle merger.
Z2 looks at his partner. They want someone to blame. I'm sorry, Y says. Truly, I am. I just...
X interjects. We know it's too late and we're not blaming you. We were hoping to look into the what-ifs.
Absolutely, Z2 says, almost too quickly, making the others curious about his motivation.
X knows that while the traffic angels might have an underappreciated job, they are people too and believe in love. And even if the real outcome can't be changed, they can at least enjoy the fantasy of possibilities. It's one of the most fun activities they have on the other side.
When Y asks, am I the only one who thinks they're meant to be together? Do you really think he was better with Francine?
No one says a word, not even telepathically. It's the question of the hour, the millennia. They consider what humans would say about the situation. They'd probably say that vacation romances never work, that the past predicts the future, that once a cheater, always a cheater, that sometimes you can't take back mean things you said or did. Inevitably, however, there will always be an idealistic soul in the mix, believing things can still work out.
The team upstairs starts with a replay of what brought them to this point. The four celestial beings flip the on button in the 3D screen in the sky to watch Nell and Robert's story, stopping from time to time to offer commentary.
After 3 stressful, lonely months in Florence, Italy, Nell arrives in Tunisia on January 11th for 3 relaxing and exhilarating months on the Mediterranean Sea. To add fuel to that excitement, she meets a new friend on the flight from Rome. She won't be alone. She'll know someone who speaks English. How did she get here, you ask? Nell had been living in Aspen, Colorado for the past 7 years, even though she only intended to come for 1. The picturesque mountain town can be a difficult location to leave, though it can also be a challenging place to acclimate to. You see, Nell gave up on finding love years ago. When her therapist tried to encourage her to get out there, her response was, "I don't want it." Why? Because to her, the worst pain was wanting something she'd never get. Aspen wasn't exactly a place where you could find someone on Match.com. She met men. They simply didn't offer the combination of a deep connection with the sizzling attraction she craved. In June, she got a message from her landlord that he was raising the rent by 50%. Yes, you read that right. With the exorbitant price increases in Aspen since COVID-19, she'd have to move. But where? She'd been writing an epic reincarnation series about Italy in her new trilogy, We Meet Again. It was the only place she could envision visiting. As she made her plans to go to Florence, her nemesis, the universe, loaded the dice against her. Was Einstein right when he said God does not play dice with the universe? Her life had been a series of teases and misses, especially in recent years. Every time she got this close to achieving a goal, she felt like Charlie Brown, suckered by Lucy with the football. Without many options, she accepted the limitations of travel visas and departed for Florence on October 14th with plans to stay the maximum of 90 days and return after a 90-day break in Tunisia. Why Tunisia? It's close to Italy, only 92 miles from Sicily, astonishingly affordable, beautiful, kind people, a great climate even in the off-season, and a place with some history for her, including being the home of a fan of her duet novels.
At the same time, Robert was embarking on his sojourn of the soul. He'd been entrenched in one long-term relationship after another, and, not to put too fine a point on it, hadn't had great sex in years. He walked away from a house and car, put his stuff in storage, and made meticulous plans to travel for an entire year without attachments of any kind, including, and especially, romantic. He started in Tunisia, one of his favorite places in the world. After a few months, as beautiful as it is, the African country can be lonely when only a small minority speaks your language. Finding someone to talk with, much less have meaningful conversations, was in short supply. And a little quixotic fun? Armed with liquid courage, Robert ventured out of his comfort zone to meet people, women in particular. But his wish remained elusive until one fateful New Year's Eve. She was there with two friends. He noticed her immediately. How could he not? She was striking. Later, he described Francine to Nell as a supermodel who is still fit and gorgeous in her 60s. Thinking she was out of his league, he asked one of her friends to dance that night. But instead, the friend told him that Francine was interested in him. He was elated, like a kid waking up on Christmas morning finding every present on their wish list was too good to be true. When they spent their first night together, it was out of this world. Best sex of his life. By far. If that's not love, what is? It had to be, because professing love was one of Francine's conditions for sleeping with him, even though they'd just met and couldn't speak the same language. Still, they declared their undying love that night, and within a week changed their Facebook status to "in a relationship" and planned a passionate voyage for an island retreat 2 weeks later. His heart was still floating the morning after she left when he took a dip in the hotel pool. He was desperate to talk with someone about this goddess he met, how his life would never be the same, and yes, how great the sex was. But his only confidants are a Polish couple who neither speak fluent English nor are particularly interested in his romantic escapades.
Meanwhile, Nell was relishing her new life, new resort, and new pool, introducing herself to others who might speak English. A Polish couple told her of a British man who is looking for someone to talk with.
"This is where they meet," Y says, stating the obvious. The others suppressed their amused grin at Y's enthusiasm. "You know how movies have that meet cute? This encounter is as good as it gets."
X doesn't say anything, but can't disagree that a morning encounter in a hotel pool is a lot more charming than New Year's Eve with liquor flowing.
"Hi, I'm Robert."
I'm Nell.
After maybe 3 sentences of niceties, "Where are you from? What are you doing here in Tunisia?" he dove in about falling in love with a supermodel who just left. He was so excited to share his momentous news with someone, even if it was a complete stranger. Now, before you judge, we all know what that feels like. You're about to burst wide open with butterflies and canaries if you can't talk about it. Given the language barrier, it's not like he could discuss it with Francine.
From Nell's end, she'd seen this before. Men who take no time to tell you they're in a relationship so you don't get any ideas. It's like when you ask some random guy for directions to the ladies' room and their response is, "I'm married." Like, wait up, dude, I'm not coming on to you. I just wanted to know where the restroom was.
Robert was telling her in plain English, she could, after all, not only understand the language but also any possible subtext, that he was not attracted to her.
Which was fine with her. Sure, he was a good-looking guy, but she didn't come to Tunisia to meet a man. She came to finish her novels. Besides, she dated enough to know that unless there was something exceptional beyond the physical, she would quickly get bored.
They had a brief chat, and that was that. But since they were at the same resort, it was not a surprise when she saw him the next day hanging out in the hotel with the friends she met on the plane. They discussed going dancing that evening. Nell declined, and he asked the two of them if they wanted to join him at a British pub nearby for a special Sunday meal the next day. He exchanged WhatsApp numbers with Nell's friend, and they said goodbye.
The following day, Nell achieved one of the most momentous events of her entire life. She typed "The End" to the novel trilogy she'd been working on for years. Yes, years. It's a strange feeling as a writer to come to that closure. She was elated and deflated simultaneously, especially when there were scenes in that final chapter that made her laugh her butt off and cry her eyes out. She was too overcome to go to the British pub with this man who was in love with another woman. But she didn't have Robert's number. She unsuccessfully tried to reach her friend to let him know, But when she didn't hear back, she was forced to go to the lobby and tell him herself. The good news was he wasn't into her, which meant Nell didn't have to spend 1 minute trying to get spruced up to impress. With no makeup and hair that hadn't been washed in days, she threw on wrinkled clothes to give him the news. When she did, he didn't seem in the least bit fazed about Nell not going. They chatted, he left. Sometime later that afternoon, they saw each other in the lobby and quickly delved into a cavernous conversation, touching on relationships, trust, and intimacy.
To be fair, sex was on both their minds, yet for wildly different reasons.
Nell was writing an erotic bonus scene for her books.
And he was, well, best sex of his life. And here he was with an American woman who had no qualms about going deep into a conversation. It was like he'd been dying of thirst, and she offered a sparkling spring of the most refreshing water on earth. They talked for a few hours when he asked her if she would bring back some Twinings tea from her 3-day trip to London.
She was leaving the next day,
promising another invitation to the pub the following Sunday as payment.
X pauses the story. It's worth keeping in mind that everything to this point was strictly platonic.
Platonic being an intriguing choice of words, given the reference to ancient philosophy in Nell's novels, don't you think? Z1 asks.
Indeed, X replies before restarting the tape. Robert and Nell zoomed through the next 3 uneventful days. She visited the UK, his home country, for the first time, went to a doctor's appointment, and walked the chilly city for hours.
During that time, they exchanged a handful of friendly texts about Britain, writing, and more. On Wednesday, she returned to Tunisia, bringing Twinings with her. He later confessed it was a ruse, as he would be returning to Britain the following Monday. Friday morning, Robert sends Nell a text, asking for a link to read her newest novel. This is where things get interesting, Y squeals as Friday arrives. I love this part.
The others chuckle, but don't disagree. The following 2 days of Nell and Robert's life should go down in the history books, which we suppose is the purpose of this story. Later, Nell and Robert discussed who was the first to flirt. He blamed her. She accused him. We'll see what you think.
Either way, they both knew they were waltzing a slow dance into dangerous heartbreak territory. Insert your favorite platitude here. The heart wants what it wants. Love can't be stopped, even and sometimes especially when it's forbidden. Soulmates will cross rivers and mountains to unite. It's sad to belong to someone else when the right one comes along. You get the idea.
Nell was both honored and thrilled that Robert wanted to read her novel. The way to a man's heart may be through his stomach, but the way to an author's is through her writing. You see, Nell put her soul into her books. Her favorite saying was, "If you want to know what women want, read what women read. If you want to plunder the depths of what makes Nell tick, read her books." This is interesting, Z1 says when Robert mentions that he's going dancing again the next night, a thinly veiled interest in whether she might physically feel up for it, as Nell has been dealing with a heart issue. Another fitting metaphor for their story, a woman with a racing offbeat heart about to be broken.
Do you think... I think he is lonely and bored, but he thinks Nell is interesting and that's it, says Z2. Or, that's what I thought at the time, he adds, narrowing his eyes.
They still wouldn't be crossing the line by going out with a group, X states.
I knew it was more, exclaims Y. She might not have noticed the way he looked at her, but I did.
The others chuckle at Y's youthful exuberance, but won't dare argue, especially since they already know what will happen next. Or at least how it ended.
That's the beauty of watching a rerun. You get to experience all the feels without the anxiety of the conflict, at least until...
X points to the screen. I think this is the moment that did it, she says, showing the next text.
The point of no return, at least for her, says Y. If I had been on Earth, I would have fallen in love with him too.
It's like he could physically tune into Nell and know exactly what would resonate, X admits.
They watch as Robert sends Nell a video of the mountains of Tunis with the message, "Went for a 6-hour walk, but took me 7 hours as I kept having to stop and cry. Too much beauty around each corner. Was overcome."
This, dear reader, was what Nell had been looking for her entire life. Yet beyond poetry or prose, she never believed it existed. This, to her, is a real man. One who's not only in touch with his feelings, but also freely expresses them. From that moment on, she was a goner. A running dialogue skidded through her brain. He has a girlfriend. He's only known her for 2 weeks. 2 weeks! He's in love. He's in lust. I can't do that to another woman. Who is she? Does she really love him? They can't even speak the same language.
His mind was muddled as well, running through the same debates, with the added fascination of Nell. He may never have had the kind of physical pleasure with a woman like Francine, but the potential for a mental, emotional bond with Nell was looming like the horizon at sunrise.
I know we're not supposed to do this without permission, X says, but I can't help dipping into Nell's emotional field to live vicariously at her response.
Me neither, admit the others. Being able to bathe temporarily in a human's burgeoning bliss is one of their favorite vicarious thrills upstairs. I'm doing it now, Z2 says uncharacteristically, making them laugh.
Was that the point of no return? Z1 asks, eager to learn the human aspect of fate versus free will.
Remember when he told her later that it was all her fault things took the inevitably sexy turn they did? The shift from friends to more, and she blamed it on him?
They nod. Even though Nell didn't think Robert had sent the video to seduce her, it had an effect that would change their relationship forever. Robert and Nell's texts got flirtier when she shared lyrics she spontaneously wrote, ostensibly intended for "we meet again," or so she thought. The devil will smell like heaven.
The devil will smell like heaven, a demon in disguise. You feel it in his aura, you see it in her eyes.
The moment you're in their presence, you lose all sense of place. A fire in the ether, an ember spiked with mace. You try like hell to get away, to walk or stroll or run, but he's a force you can't forsake. She's just too damn much fun.
The devil will steal your essence and bend you to her will. You are his only focus until he gets his fill. Dreams are more complicated. They're the best way to deliver a visitation from a loved one on the other side, or a dreamery from a past life. Still, with the foggy memory systems of the human brain, the lessons often float into the ethereal realm before they're absorbed. One night in Paris, Z2 scoffs good-naturedly. Couldn't you have been a little more subtle? It has to be one of the sexiest songs on her playlist. Why doesn't argue? Because to them, it is the sexiest song. And you know what? It worked. And why isn't sorry at all? Yes, they might have been adding a complication to his budding affair with the best sex ever woman, but they also know their role, and that was to facilitate this meeting between Robert and Nell for their soul growth.
And that is what it's all about. Learning, growth, progress.
While the others are chastising why, Z2 looks away to hide his guilty face.
Here's something you should know, dear reader, is that communication in the upstairs is what we would call telepathic. So turning your head to hide your thoughts is futile, and X calls him on it. You made it rain, didn't you?
They all know Robert is well versed in the ways of rom-com tropes and is quite aware that one of the classic seduction techniques is getting caught in the rain, offering the excuse for removing his shirt, a move he took full advantage of a few hours later when he invited himself to tea. Alone, in her hotel room.
They'd almost feel sorry for Nell and Robert, and especially Francine, if they didn't know the why for it all.
They finished the replay of Nell and Robert's first night together. Before you reprimand him for cheating or Nell for being the other woman, please know they did not cross a line. At least, not physically. She refused his offer to see him shirtless, and he didn't make a move. Their lips never connected. In fact, there was zero physical contact.
But as anyone with a pulse knows, emotional affairs can be much more threatening, and for that, guilt and karma abounds.
The team reviews some of the highlights of the evening before moving on to Robert and Nell, day 2.
I still can't believe how open they were with each other, Z1 says, looking to the others to see if they had the same impression of the remarkable connection between these two souls.
I know. I've been doing this for a long time. I've seen thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands of couples, and this level of magnetism between them is rare.
Aren't they cute together? I can't deny Robert and Nell's physical chemistry makes me want to try out a body again. It was my favorite part of being human, X says, exhibiting rare vulnerability.
No kidding. Their restraint should go down in a book of records. I was measuring it on the chem scale, and I've never seen any that high. And they didn't even have skin-to-skin contact.
The team takes a break to, reorient themselves before moving on to the Robert and Nell Day 2 review, when Robert and Nell transcended chem level infinity.
As promised, Robert took Nell to the now famous British pub, and their conversation launched into the stratosphere once again. They discussed money and goals, songs, poems, God, movies, television, friends, families, and health.
The latter issue was a crucial one. We'll get to that later.
You have to laugh at this part, Z2 says, unexpectedly good-humored.
You mean when he told her that he believes in traditional roles for men and women? I burst out laughing. Does he know Nell at all?
How old is this guy? 85? 90? They snicker.
He's 62.
I loved her response when he said he thinks women should cook and clean while the men mow the lawn.
Z1 snorts. Without a hitch, she said, I love mowing the lawn. It's good exercise.
He didn't know what to do with that. They all get a good chuckle out of this at Robert's expense. He is awfully old-fashioned for a guy who was alive in the 60s. And they point out, how did that work with his marriages?
Silence. They all know this is one of the lessons Nell came into his life to teach him. X gets serious for a moment. Nell is a handful, especially when she was so close to the successes she's craved for decades.
A lot of men would be intimidated by that.
It was more than that, dear reader, as you'll see.
They know where Robert was going with this line of conversation. It was his first genuine attempt to see if Nell would be what he was looking for in the long run. Because Francine appeared to be. His girlfriend was beautiful and subservient and ready to fit into his life without adjustment or argument.
Or growth.
Correction. His someday in the future life. At this point, it's January, meaning it's 3 months into his 12-month nomadic travels with 9 more to go. He had planned to stay unattached the whole time, but shot that to hell with the best sex with the woman he met on New Year's Eve.
Confused, Z1 asks, I don't get it. How could he have known how well Francine would mesh with his life if they couldn't speak the same language?
No one replies, though they're all asking the same thing. They continue to watch. Robert wasn't sure how to handle a woman like Nell. To be fair, few men do, which is a big reason Nell has been alone for so long. She was a tad too self-sufficient for some men, not needing them for their money, which scared them, because it meant it would be difficult to control her.
Little did they know, all they needed to offer was what she felt with Robert, a meeting of souls she'd never experienced with any man before. We all look at older couples having dinner together and see how sad it is that so many of them have nothing to talk about. That would not have been the case with Robert and Nell. To Nell, that is the essential criterion for a long-term partner. Well, that and...
Back to the question of health. Getting older sucks, especially when, inside, you're still a teenager obsessed with sex. Physically, Nell and Robert were on the cusp area of life, still vibrant enough to enjoy physical pursuits. When we said that Robert and Nell talked about everything, it included immersive, deep, penetrative conversation. Real-life couples rarely are so open with sharing the parameters of physical pleasure with their partners, but because Nell and Robert had no boundaries on what they would share with one another, they went there. Still, like anyone their age, they were both starting to experience unfortunate changes in their bodies. Nell had a heart issue that concerned Robert. Romance is full of stories about a heart skipping a beat, but they fail to mention the repercussions. And what virile male wants to worry about making a woman weak in the knees in the wrong way? On his end, he had an issue with the veins in his legs concerning Nell, as she had a friend who had died from the same condition.
Not many people know that Nell is a healer. She doesn't talk about it much, but if you meet her, you can ask. It's pretty cool. She did tell Robert, and he was an incredible listener. As you can tell from reading this story, Nell wasn't exactly the norm in terms of her worldview and experiences, so it's a special moment when she meets someone who accepts her uniqueness. As Nell and Robert were talking, she felt surges of electricity firing in her fingertips, an indisputable reminder that she was up for the task.
Did you do that too? Z2 accuses Y, who shakes their head.
Knowing she needs to come clean, X confesses. I did. Before you say anything, we need to remember one of Nell's sole goals is to put her inimitable talent to work. It's one of the reasons she needed to meet Robert.
When Nell explained this oddity to Robert, he accepted her fantastic phenomena without judgment, eager to see her put it into action. On the walk back from lunch, he took her hand in his. "Did you see it?" Y exclaims. "Just that small contact caused sparks to fly across the universe."
It was one of the most erotic moments of Nell's life. Yeah, it was that incredible. And what's even more impressive was they could talk about it. This is a couple who says what they're thinking and feeling without filters, almost like the souls upstairs. So it was no surprise, she told him, when you held my hand, I was sprinkled with Disney chemicals.
It was the same with him. He called them tingles.
Once back in the room, Nell put her healing hands to work, massaging Robert's calves and, ironically, or perhaps not so ironically, cold feet, to release any blocks in circulation.
No, it didn't go there. At least not physically. But since you are reading a not quite love story and we promised spicy, the conversation did venture into the intimate, from preferences, fantasies, and experience, as well as fears and concerns.
For both of them, this kind of openness and depth had never happened. Not even close.
Yet it also had that special crackle in the air, like when he emitted a gasp of restrained desire when she shifted slightly in her seat. Again, he asked to spend the night, just to talk with the lights off, to which she replied, "You and I both know what will happen. We won't be able to keep our hands off each other." He couldn't argue with that. Their conversation continued for 8 hours, totaling 16 in 2 days. Robert told her that he felt like they were already on their second date.
To Nell, it felt like their second lifetime.
"This is so cute," Y says when they watch Nell casually reach inside her sweater to scratch her armpit, and he laughs about it. She's so embarrassed, telling him she can't believe how comfortable she is with him.
And then he also gets an armpit itch, Z1 says, trying to suppress a smile at the couple's synchronicity.
As the team nears the end of witnessing Nell and Robert's time together, Y says, "This part is hard to watch."
Yes, X agrees, but crucial.
I wish he could have been clearer about what he was asking.
True, but he knew it was unfair for him to bring it up, so he danced around the issue.
I deplore subtext, Z2 laments. It makes our job that much more difficult, you know. We might know the lesson a soul wants to learn in advance, but when they get to Earth, they muck it up with all kinds of mix-ups and misunderstandings. They grimace when Robert told her, "I don't give a damn about your books."
Nell felt like he kicked her in the heart. They all feel it. She was tempted to get up and walk him to the door. She told him her history of giving up too much for men, of losing her sense of self, her career goals vanishing in the mist. She even told him, "I don't need a husband. I need a champion." Then why did he say he didn't give a damn about her books? Z1 asks, confused.
"Watch," promises Y. He's trying to see if they have a future, to see if Nell will fit into his vision. When he has, a girlfriend who does, Z2 spits out, tired of everyone forgetting about the one he committed to. Instead, they're rooting for the other woman. Z2 doesn't care about the soul connection or even the lesson Nell and Robert are supposed to learn. At the mention of Francine's name, Y grumbles, "Husband hunter," under their breath, escalating the tension with Z2.
X stops the playback. Not to spoil what's ahead, but we do know what was behind his comment. "And that is?" Z1 asks, sincerely puzzled how Robert could redeem himself after saying something so insensitive. 2 things. First, he's intimidated by her career, X explains.
Z1 sighs. Z2 scowls. Not the reason you might suspect. In fact, if you look into Robert and Nell's future interactions, you'll see when she overheard him bragging about her talent to others. It was truly one of the highlights of her life. Z1 relaxes. Y gives them an "I told you so" look and says he's worried she'll leave him when she becomes successful. So it came from his own vulnerability. He said it because he was already falling for her and afraid he'd lose her someday. That's sweet and sad. When the others nod, she adds, "And the second reason?"
Giving them a sneak preview into what's ahead, X explains that Nell could see where Robert was going with the question. She's seen it before. She already knew that while Robert is good at his job, inside he is a frustrated artist, writer, musician, poet, philosopher. If only he could tap into his suppressed creativity.
As you will see, there are a lot of if-onlys in Nell and Robert's story. It's the if-onlys that get us in the end. The missed opportunities, the regrets for the things we didn't do often hit us harder than the mistakes we made.
She also figured out that Robert wasn't dissing her books. He was just trying to discover the real Nell. She knows that someone's personality can often be different in work versus home situations. And it is true with her. In work, she's what's called a green personality. Outgoing, goal-oriented, fast-paced. And that's the public persona many people see. But privately, Nell is a blue. Slower-paced, people-oriented, the amiable helper.
Yet he hadn't been able to see that side of her yet. Instead, she was in a position where she felt competitive with Francine, a scenario which does not bring out the best in her. She abhors being pitted up against another woman and has vowed never to be number 2.
And yet here she is. When the day between Nell and Robert is over, X declares, "See what I mean? How cute he is about cats versus dogs. They even have the dishwasher and toilet seat debates."
I loved how she said the dishwasher is a victimless crime and therefore not worth disputing, but the toilet seat is a big issue, Y says. The others laugh, not only at the refreshing honesty, but also at the fact that humans can fight over the silliest things.
I loved how she tells him how blissful she would be spending an evening wrapped in his arms watching his favorite TV show. Aw, yet.
Y blows their imaginary nose loud enough for them to all laugh. I know. The goal here is for them to learn their lesson, so they...
Silence.
The next day, reality hit Nell and Robert hard. The pain was swift and fierce, like a bolt of lightning, followed by a flash flood, fire and rain. The connection devolved into cruelty and hurt, victim against villain.
They were over.
Nell released him to be with his so-called supermodel and enjoy his romantic island getaway, offering a clean break to allow him to see it through and figure out what he wants without thinking about her. Robert responded with cruel messages. Robert took Nell's rejection of him hard. From his perspective, Nell cut him off like the butcher with the 3 blind mice. It wasn't just that she seemed okay with moving on. It was that for the first time in his life, he found someone who really understood him. Someone with whom he could share his deepest secrets without shame or judgment. He found his best friend. That loss hit him hard.
Each was hurting. Both texted words they couldn't take back.
The thing is, Nell is not the right person to play games with. She's too genuine, too present, Z2 shares, showing a rare moment of respect for Nell. Maybe the traffic angel isn't against her as much as he implied. Until he adds, "and too intolerant. Remember that time when she was in college and found out the guy she'd invited to an important event lied about being sick? When she realized he was at his other girlfriend's house, she cut him off, smoothly and quickly, and found a replacement date within minutes."
You know as well as I do, X rebukes, that Nell has 2 conditions for a relationship. No lies and no competition. When Robert told her she was second best, that did it for her. She will not come in second for anyone, even someone her soul, and her soul guides like us, want for her. Yes, X counters, and she also gave that guy another chance. Those are the occasions that earn karma points. Not the behavior, but the forgiveness.
Y, the eternal optimist, is fully aware of the flaws in Nell and Robert's interactions, empathizing with Nell's sadness as she was doing her best to do the right thing. She has too much respect for other women to be the other woman.
At the same time, Robert kept repeating his confusing and infuriating pattern of pulling Nell in and pushing her away.
Finally, their back and forth ended with his returning to someone who did need him, Francine.
"Oh no," Z1 says, witnessing Nell's la douleur exquisite, aka exquisite plan, over the next several days. She cried. She wailed. She wept and blubbered and bawled. It felt like she'd lost her left lung, gasping for breath. It wasn't just a stimulating few days. It had been, for a fleeting moment, like the universe had flashed a vision of a world with magic, color, and illumination, only to plunge into pitch black immediately afterward. There was nothing she could do. The worst was when she was afraid she'd conjured the entire experience from her vivid imagination. The only thing she could hold on to was the memory of rubbing his feet. Emitting universal tears, Z1 whines, "Is this it? The end of Robert and Nell?" They stop the recording. "I don't understand humans." X sighs. She doesn't either, which is another reason she got too weary to incarnate anymore.
It's happened with them in other lifetimes, Z2 interjects, surprising the others with his knowledge of their history. In the 17th century, when he was a Russian Orthodox priest. After a pause, he adds, "And the other way around, when she was a sultan, and he was one of dozens in his harem trying to get his attention." Y speaks up, adopting a defensive posture. Okay, but what about the lifetime they were stranded in the mountains and needed to depend on each other to survive? Or the other time when she was a healer and traveled 1,000 miles to save his village from the plague? If that's not love. Without a word, they go back to watching. Z2 crosses his arms when the playback reveals that Robert didn't look very happy with Francine and spent much of his time thinking about Nell.
Z1 gasps with glee when Robert ended things with Francine and returned to Nell less than a week later.
"I couldn't stop thinking about you," he told her, adding, "You knew I'd return to you."
She hadn't, actually. She'd lost hope. The energy upstairs gets thick as they keep watching.
They grimace when the conversation between the couple with so much promise took a turn. Nell said something insensitive about Francine. Provoked, Robert countered with a harsh retort. Both were hurting. Each let their insecurities get in the way. Choosing the pain of separation over the fear of another agonizing clash, Robert said goodbye to Nell and returned to Francine. It was over for our couple.
The team upstairs is bereft and unable to speak. They knew this was the end, but they just couldn't believe it. The lights go out around them on a starless night.
Suddenly, a flash streaks across the sky. To humans, this looks like a meteor, but in the upstairs, it's a different kind of phenomenon. A message from the penthouse. The end is not the end. And a button with the word play.
The team sits upright, elated to see there's more to Nell and Robert's story.
For Robert, the weeks went by in agony as he was missing his best friend. Nell was his touchstone, the only person in the world he could really talk with. Yes, he got back with Francine, trying to make that relationship work beyond the physical. But Francine wasn't his best friend. Not even close. No, Robert ached to share the special moments of his life with only one person, Nell. He ached to show videos of his trips, discuss news with his business, debate plot twists in a movie, and ponder what life would be like when they're in their 80s.
Meanwhile, Nell tried to put on a good face, but she kept flashing back to Robert's thoughtful, supportive nature. Like when he was concerned about her posture as she wrote in bed, or when he offered to bring her favorite candy, salted caramel M&Ms, the next time he saw her. When she overheard him bragging about her to someone else, or when his compassion flowed like tears when she told him about a sad chapter of her life. Even though on paper they hadn't known each other long, they were as close as two people could be after spending a lifetime or lifetimes together. For her, it was torture lamenting the missed opportunity she'd become convinced had been choreographed from above. Meeting Robert wasn't a chance encounter. It was purposeful and destined. She was right, of course. On some level, she knew that there were other worldly forces upstairs orchestrating her encounter with Robert. She could sense them like invisible magicians, converting mirages into miracles.
Seizing the opportunity for a reunion, Robert reached out to Nell, inviting her once again to the British pub when he was planning to return to Tunisia a couple of months later.
"No," she replied. "Not if you're still with Francine."
Ready to finally follow his heart, Robert ended things with Francine within the hour, and the date was set. Robert and Nell were finally going to have their chance. In the weeks before his visit, they talked on the phone for hours, often through the night. To go from a relationship without communication to one overflowing with conversation was like the sun coming out after a long, rainy season.
For Nell, she was elated with excitement. Could they really make it work? Would the sexual chemistry be as electric as when they met? How would it be to spend 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for an entire month with the man she'd been fantasizing about for ages? Would it be the bliss she imagined in her secret, private moments?
However, as his best friend, she also struggled with Robert's needing to follow through on his original plan to explore the single, nomadic life for the remainder of the year without being tied down to anyone, including her.
Would they be able to navigate this treacherous terrain?
As it turns out, in the end, they couldn't. After one of the best months of their lives, it was abruptly over as soon as Nell said those 3 poetic words as she left for the airport.
Even though they had made plans and reservations to see each other in less than a month, the separation did not bring out the best in Robert. The man who vowed to be alone couldn't.
With oceans of regret between them, Robert and Nell moved on with their lives.
X holds back a sniffle. Z1 shivers.
Y sobs. Even Z2 is mourning.
They pull each other in for a group hug. An embrace upstairs is different from those on Earth.
Up there, combined energies can conjure a force strong enough to spark a new species into existence.
After a period of grieving Nell and Robert's missed opportunity for transcendental love, the team returns to the task at hand, discussing how things might have turned out if the timing for Robert and Nell had been different. The team goes through over a dozen circumstances, and all are tragedies.
The end really is the end, isn't it? Y sobs, emitting the kind of anguished tears only known in the heavenly realm. At least they gave it a solid chance by spending a whole month together, Z2 says, now readily admitting that things wouldn't have worked out with Francine either. And it was beautiful and wonderful and blissful, Y says, glimmering tears streaming down their face.
For a while.
They did their best.
Did they?
His final words to her were, "I hope we meet again in another life."
The years roll by as Robert and Nell live separate lives.
He misses her.
She'll never forget him.
Every so often, late at night, Robert goes for a long walk and reminisces about the American woman who healed him, body and soul. He talks with her as if she's by his side, reminiscing and discussing the meaning of life. He swears he can hear her reply. As he imagines holding her hand, he can feel the electricity of her fingers laced with his. One day, his precious granddaughter gets seriously ill. There's nothing the doctors can do. Being such an emotional man, it hits him hard. His granddaughter's pain, his daughter's torment, his powerlessness. The doctors try every test and treatment, but she keeps getting worse and worse. He remembers. Of course he does. After one treatment from Nell, his thrombosis had been entirely and irrevocably healed. No more cold feet or the need for compression socks, and he had improved circulation throughout his body. His doctors had said it was impossible. A miracle. That's what he needs now. A miracle. Can he muster the courage? If not now, when? He knows how to reach her. Heck, the whole planet knows how to find her. She has fans and followers around the globe. Will she remember him? It's not exactly like he treated her well in the end. He knows she felt immense heartbreak at the time. Did the healer ever recover from her broken heart? He scoffs at his self-importance. She probably thinks she dodged a bullet with the confused, unstable Brit who chose the selfish path instead of the more fulfilling one. It reminds him of a Dan Fogelberg song that, given her love for music, she inevitably would know. Neverlands. It's a song about fear and choice. With nowhere to turn, he calls her. Incredibly, her number still works. Even more astonishingly, she answers, almost as if she'd gotten a psychic nudge in advance that he'd be calling. She's on the first plane.
Decades later, Robert's granddaughter publishes a bestseller with the following dedication: "To the healer who brought me and my grandfather back to life." The end.
Is the end the end?
What do you think?
Thanks so much for listening to my story. And a big thanks to Eliza, Kaye, and Zahan Mehta for their amazing performances. If you want to download and read the story for free, the link is in the show notes. Many are asking if there's a part 2, and the answer is yes. Follow me, Brownell Landrum, on Facebook, Instagram, or YouTube and request the link. Or stay tuned to this channel to listen to the rest of the story. If you have any questions or want to discuss the end, please join our Facebook group entitled The End Discussion Group. Thanks again for listening. Hi, this is Brownell. For more of these transcendental tales, please join the Life is a Trip group on Facebook and check out my amusing and enlightening story entitled The End, which you can find on my website, brownelllandrum.com. That's BrownellLandrum.com. And please look for my upcoming novel trilogy entitled We Meet Again. It's a story about a famous couple reincarnated today to help solve a centuries-old mystery that will change the world.